My name's Greg Farley, and I'm the Director of Sustainability for Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland.
My name is Sam Gomberg. I'm a Senior Energy Analyst with the Union of Concerned Scientists. I'm also our Internal Sustainability Director.
Hi, I'm Elenor Hodges, and I'm the Executive Director of EcoAction Arlington.
My name is Larry Zaragoza. I'm Vice Chair of the Environmental Quality Advisory Council in Fairfax County. We are an advisory group to the County Board.
Hi, I'm Erik Gutshall, member of the Arlington County Board. Join us in conversation.
Well, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I've been in and out of the environmental sector sort of my whole life. But what really finally grasped me and got me motivated was really the dynamic complexity of the issues that we're facing, both at the micro level and the macro level. It's just fascinating. And then when you layer on this whole new generation of equity and social justice issues, and it just gets more complex and more important, it's just a very exciting time to be engaged in these issues.
I've been involved in environmental issues now for well over 30 years, and I continue to find it to be rewarding. I've been involved in multiple groups around the area, from COG to Arlington County when I lived here. Now I live in Fairfax County, and I think it's really rewarding to not just try to contribute to things so you make them a little bit better in the future.
Students would thank you for that. So I've worked my entire career in sort of higher education. I'm a biologist by training, and the sustainability part of what I do just sort of grew out of the science. But a couple of you have said something now about like sort of the emerging complexity or new issues, or the sort of the role for sort of new and innovation in the younger generation in this. And the generation coming through now is really, really dynamic. They're critically interested in these things, and like they're both excited. They're a little bit angry with us in our generation because we haven't really done as much as we probably should have in pushing environmental policy forward. And so sometimes the challenge for higher ed is to help them see the bigger picture and to help them focus their energy into one place where it's really going to make a difference.
I think they're probably rightly sort of outraged and angry at the direction that we've been headed. I first got very passionate about the environmental movement as an undergrad, and then I went on to get a master's in environmental policy, and then I did some environmental consulting for a few years, but I kind of left the field somewhat disillusioned and always thinking that I would incorporate it into other things, which I have done. So now that I've entered public life, it's really sort of tying it all back together, and it is an exciting time. So I feel like I'm trying to make up for some lost time, and not only what maybe I could have been doing over the intervening years, but really thinking about what we as a society need to be doing to address what I personally believe is absolutely the most fundamental issue of facing humanity to date.
And what's amazing is the opportunities that have come along in the last, even just since I've been doing this over the last 10 years. When you look at what the options were on the table, even when I first started paying attention to the climate, to our energy issues, to our water quality issues, to what are the options on the table now with modern technologies, with the ability to communicate with the data that we're able to collect and use to understand the issues better. I'm really excited about the ability to solve these problems if we get motivated, right? And that's super cool in my mind. Is looking at this from an energy sector, a water sector, a justice sector, is we have so much more information to solve these problems, and so many more tools to then take and implement and solve these problems.
How do you think we define motivated?
Motivated?
Like, because I was thinking political will, right? Like, it's one thing to have the technology and to have where scientists and policymakers might understand that there are solutions that are available, but in terms of getting the political will to actually move forward with those tools.
Part of it's the younger generation. Part of it's awareness. Getting past sort of the political talk and getting into the substance of the issues. I think there's a lot of people doing really good work in that space. And part of it is recognizing the economic opportunity, particularly here. We face an aging infrastructure that we need to fix. We're facing an enormous transition, at least in the electricity sector, that provides a ton of jobs and a really cleaner, better product than what we've had historically. So there's a huge opportunity that I think if we communicate right, people can grasp hold of.
So do you have any thoughts about how to communicate right? Because I totally agree with you about the technology. And one of the frustrating things to me is it seems like we move so slowly. I mean, living in Fairfax County, I think about how we're doing in terms of solar and other renewables. And while I see a lot of progress, I see a lot of things going on in DC. I see a lot going on in Maryland. It seems like some of the incentives to move people in the renewable area could be greater in Virginia, and I would love to see some of that change. And I'm always excited to see when different counties like Arlington, they take on these different initiatives like energy plans, and which I think everyone should have. That makes all the sense in the world. And then you hear about what happens when you go overseas, or I have a friend who had a son, he just went to Costa Rica for a week. They stayed at a hotel. Everything was run on renewable energy. Everything. And I think to myself, why aren't we doing more of that here?
It is interesting that the kind of that saying that we didn't leave horse and buggy behind and go to automobiles because there was a problem with pollution from horses or any other reason. It was because it was a better way to get around. And I think that a lot can be said. There's an analogy there for the environmental movement, although ironically transportation has had a huge environmental impact. But there's an analogy there in that I think to get to what is next, to get to a truly sustainable community, and what does that look like in terms of our food supply, our energy sources, everything about the way that we live, it has to be because we're offering something, that there is something that is not just makes policy sense, but it just makes common sense. And it's like, this is a better way to live. And I think when we can connect that with getting that message out to people, that's then when we start to make the real connections and where we will get the political will. It's doing that leapfrog, though, that I think it's the stage that we're at right now that we're working on. And of course, Elenor, you guys, what you do with EcoAction Arlington is a big part of helping people to understand what it is that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's awareness is up, the opportunities are up, but I still think that kind of doing the thing needs to be almost made, like the incentives are such an important part because it needs to be easy, and most people are not going to just do it even if it's available.
Yes.
And then, I mean, I think the other thing is we have quite a diverse community, so we have to recognize that we've got to get everybody together to do these things, which I think is probably part of the challenge.
But I think that communication does start from the bottom up. I think the opportunities for sort of top-down change are very, very limited at the federal level. And what you're seeing are colleges, local governments, corporations, all the change that we're seeing right now in the United States, so much of it is happening from the ground up, and communicating at the local level is, I think, where it all starts, really.
And I think people need that feeling of involvement, that they're going to do something and they're going to make a difference, and then then it can kind of become those bigger movements that then happen at the colleges and the businesses. And I think a lot of people also have positions of sustainability, which is a new thing. So you're looking throughout your organization or college, which is exciting. That didn't exist a few years ago.
And a whole nother layer of complexity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that has been extremely interesting. I've been doing that for just a couple of years, our internal sustainability, and just for a public interest organization, understanding, well, how do we reduce our paper use? How do we offset our own energy use? How do we get people to commute more sustainably? These types of things, they all have a layer of complexity that is a bit daunting, but also, like, as someone who's an analyst, like, let's dig in, let's figure out why isn't this as easy to fix as just sending out an email and be like, we should all commute more sustainably, and understanding that is interesting. Yeah.
Do you find that the first layer of questions you have to answer about sustainability for your organization are sort of the well, why should I do that? Or is it more, how do I do that? Because I think I get both flavors of that on my desk. There's definitely the, I send out an announcement, it's Earth Day, why don't you try and carpool tomorrow? And the first set of reactions I get back are like, well, how do we coordinate that? How do we know everybody's going to leave the office at the same time? How do we know who's going to park the car where? It's at that level of sort of almost, the questions that on my desk don't seem to matter all that much. Like, just figure it out, We tell our students to do this stuff all the time. Can't you just park the car and walk to the office? What's your experience with that?
It's very similar. People I think immediately get a little bit defensive when you try to implement change. And it's listening and it's understanding. Like, all our lives are different. It's very easy for me to ride my bike or walk to work, but I don't have kids to take to school. I don't have parents that I need to take care of here in town. I don't have a lot of logistics I need to figure out where I can take either that extra time or so forth. And it's understanding across our organization is 200 people, and there's so much diversity there. Think about an entire a company like Facebook, or an entire municipality, or an entire county. You've got to find solutions that work. You've got to make incremental change. You've got to raise awareness, and you've got to be understanding that people have their lives to live, and try to at least motivate them to do the best they can.
But my students' rebuttal would immediately be, the time for moderation and slow, steady state change is done. We need action. We need rapid action. We need rapid action yesterday. Get in the car and carpool. Yeah. How do you answer that? I mean, how do you incentivize this behavior change?
Well, I think it's very interesting because there's a lot of truth. I believe, I would agree that it has to come from the grassroots. It has to come from the bottom up. That you can't lead from the top. But on the other hand, I think that there's some fundamental transformative policies that we that do have to at least have follow through at the top levels, because I would argue, getting back to that, we have to deliver a better way of living. That if it's about, I'm going to make a personal sacrifice in order to carpool to save the planet, some people will do that, but most people just won't on a fundamental basis. But if we were investing in public transit and other options in a way where you didn't have this huge, massive public, investment in a road network that allows everybody to drive their own car, if the university wasn't paying for all of those parking spots that allowed people to very easily drive to work, you would have a whole different dynamic. And that does kind of have to come, whether it's the top of the university or the top of a county or the top of a state or any other organization, there has to be follow-through at the top level. So it's not, I think you need to have that groundswell of support, because the top leadership can provide some leadership, but can't make ultimate changes in direction that the people en masse don't support. So you need the grassroots, level, but you also got to have action at the top too.
But the other thing to think about is you talked about, I'm thinking about carrots and sticks now, because you talked about taking away parking spots and you talked about improving the earth. And so one of the things that I think happens is when you take some actions that may be a good thing to do in the long term, they come across as being negative, and people will get upset about taking away the parking space. And for that reason, I really believe that the way to get people to take action is through information and carrots, if you will. Give them something positive. And I also think that we're making a lot of positive changes. I mean, I look at Fairfax County, for example, we've adopted an energy policy, and we're continuing to evolve, and we're engaging in more and more things all the time. As things go on, there's a reorganization that's taking place right now as well. But I really do think that in the end, information is really key. My son is going to be going to college this year, and he's going to be in environmental science, and I think he's going to make the changes that that I haven't made. And I see these kids over and over again, and they're so enthusiastic about doing something. And I talk to them all the time about personal dynamics and trying to engage people in a positive way. And I really think that's the key to bringing people along and engaging them and wanting to stay engaged.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and I guess I've been thinking about some of the campaigns we did. So we had a plastic-free challenge in the fall where the focus was on reducing your use of single-use plastics, and it's really hard if you think about it, how much single-use plastics we all use. And people were frustrated, but they came up with ideas of things they could do, and then you get to a certain level in a company where the packaging comes, so you do need, I think, that company commitment, so there's companies that are saying we're not going to use this plastic anymore, and then the customers can rise up and do their part. But
and clearly, in my experience, I've worked for a couple different institutions of higher education, and if the presidential imprimatur is on that initiative, then it will, by and large, it'll get a lot of buy-in and get a lot of support. If I have to build that all the way from the student base up and then convince the rest of the school, it's doable, but it's a lot longer process. It takes a lot more lifting on my part. Sometimes I think the role for leadership is to just sort of throw open the door so that those of us who are change agents can sort of roll through it with the idea. It's just that buy-in from the top is really important.
Yeah, it's a nice mental image, actually. It works pretty well. I think, Elenor, when you were talking about getting use of single-use plastics, so it's become kind of, I think, a big cause of action, right, to no longer use straws anymore. So just last week when I was with my daughters and we were at a restaurant and they came and delivered the drink with the straw, and one of my daughters said to the server, said, "We don't need these, we don't want these." Now, the straw had already been served. Obviously, that wasn't going to get recycled, but if enough people do that, it sends the message, it would get through to management. And that's sort of a good example, I think, of how you can actually enact change, in that case, from the grassroots.
Yeah, and hopefully, at least saves a few cents for the restaurant if they stop giving out straws automatically. So there's the economic part of it and then doing the right thing. Yeah. I was going to ask, so across a campus, our students, is it important that it's holistic? Because sometimes I feel like students get a little cynical if they see something that's really working well, like a total commitment to renewable energy and then no recycling.
Sure.
So and
it does. Those moments of sort of disjunct appearances garner a lot of attention, right? And I don't think it impedes progress for us, but it definitely, I get a lot of email about it, right? So case in point, we had like a homecoming and celebration event on campus a couple weekends ago. We've been really pushing forward on trying to reduce our energy use and trying to reduce carpooling or reduce commuting to campus and all the rest of that. And then they showed up to decorate, as they have done for the past 237 years or whatever it is, for the homecoming event. And they brought in balloon arches with latex balloons, and there's caterers coming in with plastic forks, individually wrapped in plastic bags. And I got emails from students, from faculty, from a couple of the administrators. And the good bit about that is that gives me like a document that I can then push forward and say, we really need to think about a policy now as a college to say we're just not going to hire at this level anymore. Right?
And that's true. And you need the policy within the organization or within the college, right? So that, because you probably have dozens of people that could call a caterer at any given moment, right?
Right.
And order food for a meeting or what have you. And so it needs to be a policy. It needs buy-in from the top. It needs to be communicated to the staff. And it needs to be communicated to them in a way that, there are other options. But we're, not just, when you cater, we're not accepting plastic forks and paper plates and all these things. So this is what you should do, right? So that they understand. Not only are we not doing that, but I go to the cabinet, we have plates there, whatever it is. Right?
And I think it's also important that you don't place the onus of doing the research to find the alternative on those people, because they're already busy anyway.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Kind of my job is to try and find that. But to your point, the downside to that conversation is often, bamboo plates are, they're literally 4 to 6 times more expensive than disposable styrofoam, right? So how do you negotiate that conversation becomes really important also, because you have to be able to show the economic common sense of it as well.
Why do you think that they're so much more expensive? Is that truly because they really are on a unit basis, expensive, or is it a scale issue? Is it a subsidy issue on one side? What's going on there?
Are we on the record? I think there are a couple of things. I think there is. There's a large standing industry that generates styrofoam plates and plastic forks and whatnot, and that's an established thing, and their costs of manufacture are down, and their transportation and delivery is established.
Right.
And companies that are trying to do something different are trying to get into that value chain, and they're smaller, and so their costs are higher, and the cost of materials, it's hard to compete with the cost of oil some days, right? So I think there's some of that. I think there's also a little bit of opportunism in the marketplace where, I make a sustainable product. I can charge 4 times more and people will willingly pay for that.
Right.
And there's some evidence that that's true.
Right.
Right. So.
And if it's successful, then more people will get in.
Right. And I mean, if market
presumably.
forces work the way we think they do, that should drive costs down. There's no wood I can knock on, right?
Right, right.
Knock on wood, right? But that's the hope.
Well, the reality is, I think, everything we're talking about is the consequences of literally every day there are billions of individual decisions that all add up to where we are. And we're trying to bend it because one of the ultimate outcome, and one of the things that I still struggle with, is we're talking about whether it's single-use plastics, styrofoam plates, carpooling to work. Are all of these things, if we did all of those things, is that really fundamentally changing the equation, or are we nibbling around the edges, and do we need something that is much more structural and much more fundamental? And so because that's frankly where I feel in my lifetime where we've been, you do these things because they make sense, they're good for the environment, but yet, we still can go and do a stream cleanup and find plenty of plastic and plenty of things that shouldn't be in the stream. And maybe it's not quite as bad as it was 30 years ago, a few less tires and really awful things, but you still we're finding these things. So fundamentally, how do we fundamentally change the economic equation?
So I think part of it is you need to change the goals, because you were describing how we're doing the things that are easy, the low-hanging fruit. It's not a pain point, but you start thinking about things like shifting over to entirely renewables. Then you have certain industries that are out there that would be impacted, and that would definitely be something that's going to cause a good deal of debate and tension. And then you have take recyclables. I mean, the whole region has been talking about composting food materials and stuff for ages, and now it seems like we're getting more facilities to do that kind of thing, and it could greatly affect our recycling rate. And then you have other things like glass. I mean, people are dumping glass. If the stuff can be recycled plastics, any kind of, my discussions with people in the plastics industry, they can recycle it all. They just need to know that there is a market. And the problem is we're not getting enough people to do that. When it comes to renewables, I mean, that's one where there's a commitment and there's a cost. And the problem is the cost is up front. And in the long term, you will come out in different ways, especially when you start looking at the impacts of failing to take action. But that's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of information, and you need to start talking about affecting, how it's affecting your kids and their kids.
Absolutely, and I there is a part to that, right? I mean, 10 years ago, you started to see this groundswell of demand for cheap renewable energy. People wanted it, companies wanted it, utilities either wanted it or their states were requiring them to get it, and the market responded. And look at where we are now with wind and solar and battery storage all experiencing enormous price declines. I think it's the same sort of thing. If we raise awareness and people are demanding better commuting options and people are demanding better public transit options, that the market will respond, the government will respond. I remember when I lived in Tennessee and the community I lived in was debating about curbside recycling. And one of the business leaders got up there and said, it says so much more about us that we don't have curbside recycling than it would if we did. Because at that point, the people they were trying to attract just took that, they just expected that to happen. Right. So those types of things and seeing that shift. So, personally, yeah, you can get a little down on the tiny bit of difference that each of us make, but in terms of implementing environmental action plans, spreading the word, communicating with people, that's what builds the demand that makes either a politician or a market participant or an entrepreneur, an inventor say, it makes sense for me to figure out how to make this happen.
I wonder if there's, I agree completely, but I do wonder if we haven't really touched on what I think the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is that, and Larry references a little bit, that as you start to get some momentum where there is a stakeholder who has a vested interest in the status quo, and we start to get that pushback, which sometimes is economically driven, sometimes ideologically driven, whatever the case may be. And I don't think that we have as a society, as a community, I think I think Arlington is certainly capable of understanding and resisting some of those forces, but I don't think as a broader society and community that we've really wrestled with that, and that we have the right civic infrastructure in place to deal with that. Right? We're still, for some reason that I don't think you could have written this in a novel, and it would have been plausible if 30 years ago somebody had said, 30 years from now there's going to be some semblance of a debate going on whether or not there's actually climate change, human-caused climate change, and yet that is the reality of where we are. So it seems like, to kind of tie it together, as you open, I think, with the notion of that we've got a younger generation that is fed up, and they're not going to take it anymore, and they're not going to just accept that this is the world that they're inheriting. That it's going to take more of that and more of this groundswell to really say enough is enough, and it's time for action, and we're going to look at where the science leads us, look at what the evidence-based solutions are, and actually do something.
Amen. Amen. And I mean, the students on your campus and the people that are mobilizing, yes, we should demand action from our neighbors, but really we should demand better ways to do these things. I should turn to the person in the office next to me and demand that they carpool, no matter how complex their mornings might be or what have you. I should demand that my city have a better way for people to get around, and a lower carbon, more sustainable way for people to get around.
Well, what are we, forgive me, but what are we old farts going to do to support that younger generation that wants to make that change?
Listen.
Well, I think there's listening, and then there's also engaging, because I recall when I was younger, I was into recycling, I was concerned about climate change, I was interested in all these things, and as you start to work on some of these issues, you come to find out it's not all that easy, and then you face all these different kinds of arguments, like on climate change. Okay, so if Arlington goes all the way down to zero carbon, it may cost a lot of money, but if Arlington does all that work and other counties do nothing, you could still have an increase in overall carbon emissions. And so the problem is that you need to bring everyone along in order to make a difference, and therein lies the problem. And then you look at what's going on in Europe and some other countries, the countries that have the largest footprints, China, and we need to unite all these parties in order to really achieve goals and reduce the impacts, because the projections, just the economic projections, sea level rise, I think a lot of people are just in denial about it. And if you look at the increases in CO2 levels just in my lifetime, it's just, amazing. We crossed 400, and we've it's just it's a challenging task.
And not only do we need to demand it for ourselves, we need to demand it for everybody.
Exactly.
We need to demand it for our neighbors and the communities that we as a society have marginalized over the years, and that's we really need to struggle with those issues and figure out how this transition to really a sustainable world is a transition that everyone can benefit from, that everybody sort of gets to participate in, because we need everybody on board to fix the problem, right? So, yeah.
And it might be a little bit of, let's not wait for it to be perfect, like we're doing things. Right. So, some of these things will just make the tides turn and the momentum happen, and, progress will.
That's true.
Progress is good.
But part of it too, I think, is vision, because people have a different vision about what they want to do. So they're all working there's a lot of parties working independently, and they pull or push in different directions. And if somehow there could be greater alignment, maybe we could get more progress. And that's where information sharing and exchange of ideas and building consensus, I think, becomes really important. And it's really encouraging to see counties take action, but it takes the work of a lot of counties to begin to build that momentum where you can begin to get states and the country moving in the same direction.
Larry, I just agree so much, and I think it gives me optimism. I'm optimistic because I think that we've reached the tipping point where now we can see that the cost of inaction is too great.